All right, Master Gardener Trainee, this is part 5 of vegetable gardening. It's the last section. So let's take a moment here and try to grab a piece of paper. You're grabbing paper, right? And something to write with, right? All right, let's think about this a second. What does organic mean to you? Hmm. What words are you writing down? Natural? Wholesome? Better? Chemical free? Pesticide free? More flavorful? Environmentally sound? More expensive, maybe? There are lots of things you may be thinking. It's hard for me to tell without having an audience right here in person. A lot of people misconstrue the big O, organic. So let's talk about what organic is and what organic ain't. Organic foods are not necessarily pesticide free. This is especially true if you go into any Mega Mart grocery store in the United States of America and in Canada and England and wherever else that they're selling produce or beef or whatever that's organically produced, and it looks nice and blemish free and is full of vitamins and minerals and goodness. But if it's without much in the way of cosmetic damage or any issues or fuzzy wuzzies, it probably was sprayed with something to beat off the things that want to eat the crop that you want to eat too. So they're not necessarily pesticide free. There are pesticides that are allowed for organic food production. They are typically non-man made though. Typically. There are exceptions, like sodium hypochlorite. We call that bleach. Why would you use bleach in organic production? Well, you got to disinfect various equipment, obviously. If you're buying a bag of already washed and dried organic leafy greens, salad greens, mesclun mix or something, they wash them and then they rinse them, and they rinse them with a mild amount of sodium hypochlorite, bleach, to prevent you from getting an illness, an outbreak from E. coli because some animal went over the vegetable field just before they picked. Didn't say it was always pretty, did I? Copper sulfate is used primarily as a fungicide and a bactericide. We'll talk more about that in the IPM and other modules of this class. Ivermectin. Now, this isn't talking so much about the use on plants. It's for parasite control in livestock, whether it's organic or not organic production. It is an allowable input of a man-made parasite controlling mechanism. You wouldn't want to eat parasites that are in some of your beef now, would you? They tend to use more natural substance like soaps, which are potassium fatty esters of potassium salts. Lime, sulfur, used primarily as a fungicide. Hydrogen peroxide is used as primarily a disinfectant and cleaning out lines and some other things. Again, it is relatively all innocuous. Not all natural substances are allowed in organic agriculture. Some chemicals like arsenic, strychnine, and tobacco dust, they're all natural, but they are prohibited. So natural is not necessarily the definition for organic. Here's a battle that was raging back a few years ago, a battle over antibiotics in organic apple and pear farming. I got this from NPR's website. You can go and read the whole article, and I pretty much copied and pasted some of the highlights of it and added just a couple of comments and brackets. Up until I think it was 2014 or 15, organically produced pears and apples could be sprayed with antibiotics. Surprised? I bet you are. To be clear, it's not the apple or the pear exactly that is sprayed with the antibiotic when it was allowed in organic production. It was the flowers that were sprayed with the antibiotic. Why the heck would we want to use antibiotics? Well, think about the various types of things that can cause diseases of plants. Most of the disease-causing organisms of plants will be fungal, but there are bacterial infections of plants, and we've talked about some of those in various modules so far in the class. Apples and especially pears are vulnerable to a nasty bacterial infection called fire blight that left unchecked can spread quickly, killing fruit trees and sometimes devastating whole orchards. Here's my words in brackets. The disease is vectored by bees as they pollinate the flowers. So our wonderful honeybees, or other pollinating insects for that matter, are vectoring or spreading the disease in the orchards growing apples and pears. We need to have the pollination, but the bee is the thing that's carrying the bacteria and infecting the plant. You can see how insidious this disease is. So, according to the article, it's basically like gangrene of your limbs. It's quite good analogy, to be honest. What happens is you can see the shoot starts to die back, so new growth can't occur. Eventually that bacterium starts to move in the conductive tissue into the uninfected lower older limbs, and it becomes systemic in the plant. And it's hard to stop it once it's in the plant. Now there are techniques to prune this out, but again, pruning can only do so much. It's such a big threat that for decades growers have seen two antibiotics, streptomycin and oxytetracycline, things you may recognize off the top of your head. You may have taken one or the other or both in your lifetime, as vital weapons in the fight to control the disease, even on organic apples and pears. Now this was from 2013. It's no longer an acceptable input in organic apple or pear production. It's been forbidden by the National Organics Board. It's no longer currently allowed, but growers are clamoring or asking for the National Organic Standard Board to allow it again. Why would these guys who are growing organically want to be using antibiotics? Well, let's go back to what it said earlier in this article. It can sometimes wipe out whole orchards of apples and pears. That's a very costly expense to the grower and to you, the consumer of it. And let's be honest, they only spray the blossoms, so it's only a short and narrow window of when it's sprayed. It's maybe once or twice during the flowering cycle. I don't know off the top of my head. And it's a very small amount of antibiotic. So does the cause justify the means? Again, it's a philosophical question, but occasionally things that a lot of people will be shocked are allowed in organic production. This also begs the question of organic standards. Organic standards are constantly changing and evolving, so what may be allowed today during this recording may not be allowed tomorrow. Antibiotics may once again be allowed in organic production. I don't know at this point. So here are some of the rules. You can click on the links. I'm not sure if they're hot linked when you are viewing this at home or not. You can obviously copy and paste or painstakingly type that into your address bar. So one regulator obviously is the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, has all the rules spelt out of what is allowed in organic production. There's a huge list of pesticides labeled for organic food production. There's a huge number of insecticides, miticides, bactericides, fungicides, rodenticides, molluscicides, and on and on. For a homeowner who is into organic gardening, here is a very good website, OMRI, O-M-R-I, the second link, and you can see what is listed and has been reviewed and approved for organic inputs. A lot of us will, when are asked about what is organic or not, will refer to this certification agency's website for people to look up whether one brand of insecticidal soap is considered organic or another brand of insecticidal soap may not be. Sometimes that happens, or sometimes it's various forms of some of the products that are allowed or not allowed. Sometimes it may be because of the inactive ingredient in the pesticide and not the active ingredient, which will dictate whether it's allowed in organic production or not. Just to be clear, though, as a homeowner, you don't really have to follow the rules and regulations so stringently. But if you're doing it for production and making a certain money threshold of money, I think it's $5,000 or $10,000 annually on your produce or beef or whatever, you have to follow the National Organic Standard Board rules and regulations for organic agriculture. Now, I know some homeowners that don't spray with much more than soapy water and may use a synthetic fertilizer and feel that they're perfectly organic. Granted, that would not fly by USDA standards, though. So, now we've covered the big O. That means we're still going to have to do some controlling of garden insects, organically or not. And there are all sorts of them: ants, cutworms, corn stalk, lesser corn stalk borers, mole crickets. Mole crickets we think of primarily as a turf pest, and that's really quite true. Their favorite area to be is really the Bahia grass, but sometimes they'll dig around in veggie gardens causing some problems. Sweet potato weevils, I have seen that. That causes a lot of damage to sweet potatoes. White grubs will get on sweet potatoes, sometimes potatoes as well. Wireworms I haven't seen too very often. A lot of times ants aren't really damaging the crop, but they are actually farming or raising piercing sucking insects on your particular vegetable. For example, they like to farm uh, aphids frequently. Aphids are a piercing sucking insect that when they feed, they eat, and of course if it eats, it excretes, and they excrete what is called honeydew, a sticky, sweet fluid. The ants use that honeydew for a food source. Boy, I'm glad I wasn't born an ant. Anyhow, so it's usually we control the piercing sucking insects, such as aphids on the um, veggies, to control the ants in a vegetable garden. Then we have various chewing insects. The cabbage is a good example. When you get to that point in the story with that much chewing damage, you harvest the thing, you soak it in a little bit of salted water to kill the bugs or have them go eek and get out of the cabbage, and then you cut it up into thin shreds of coleslaw. No one will notice if you missed a caterpillar or two. You eat bugs all the time, people. Get over it. All right, so we have various worms. We have various, which are really caterpillars of our cruciferous Brassicaceae vegetables. We have various beetles that'll go after some of the vegetables. Weevils, grasshoppers, occasionally, especially on the monocots, the corn, etc. The big problem with insects and veggies are most people don't notice or know, excuse me, what insect can go after what plant, or are surprised that, gee, something actually goes after cabbage. Yes, it's called the cabbage looper. When an insect is named for a plant, it's a problem. So if you're getting into veggie gardening, know all the diseases of insects that can occur on your plants. Here we have some kind of chewing damage. It would be hard pressed to tell you what exactly caused it. It could be slugs, it could be a weevil, it could be something else. You have to scout or look around to find the culprit. Now, just because you have some holes in the leaves, you may still get perfectly enough production out of these sweet potatoes. Most of us aren't eating the leaves of sweet potato anyhow, so who cares? Here you got bean beetles. The upper three are immature, or the larval stage of the beetle. They have complete metamorphosis, so they do change their look and shape of their body throughout their life. The one by the person's fingernail is an adult. They both feed on plants with chewing mouthparts. Here's something in a tomato. Is that hail? Well, I just see a perfectly circular hole. If I were to cut that open, I'd probably find a nice little caterpillar. My guess is an army worm of some sort. I mentioned piercing sucking insects, or piercing sucking creatures. One of them isn't an insect. I'll correct that in a second. Aphids, spider mites are not insects, they are mites. You can tell they are not insects because spider mites have 8 legs, whereas insects have 6. We have various leaf hoppers, leaf-footed plant bugs, or it's a type of stink bug, very common on fruiting crops, tomatoes, peppers, squashes, and the like. Various squash bugs, various caterpillars that love to bore into the stem, squash vine borer. They'll also go after all the other Cucurbitaceae family members, the melons, things like that. Thrips I don't generally see too often in veggie gardening, but they can happen. Whiteflies, especially on sweet potato, is where I see them. Here are some aphids. Aphids can vary in color from this kind of almost blackish color, mahogany, green, almost clear. So don't let the color be the good indicator of that. It's just a different species of aphids. But you can see here they are probably in this picture, probably about 20 or 30 of them piercing and sucking out the fluids. This is a fairly light infestation at this point, at least right there. But if we look at the leaf kind of away from that stem a little lower, can you see the puckering, that wrinkling of the leaves? That's an indicator something probably is feeding on the underside of those leaves too. Now, as gardeners, we're going to have to start controlling these things. I've had people come in to the office who are organic gardeners and are surprised I recommend they spray with something like neem oil. Neem oil is an organically approved pesticide used quite frequently in organic vegetable growing. A lot of these people think you somehow magically make them disappear by going shoo, shoo, or something. I don't know. Now, we also have insects that can vector diseases to our various vegetable crops. Tomato leaf curl virus is the lower picture, is vectored by whiteflies. There's another example of whiteflies on a plant. You can see how the leaves look crinkled and kind of yellow, almost looks like a nutrient deficiency, but strongly the new leaves that will show this. It could mimic a nutrient deficiency if you don't kind of recognize the look, for lack of a better way of explaining it to you. When you see this in your tomatoes, you need to be ruthless. We were dealing with a particularly small hydroponic grower a few years ago, and they had this riddled through their stackers, and they were just keeping these plants, and it was serving as a cesspool of disease vectoring insects, moving it from tomato to tomato to tomato. And as they replanted, the new tomatoes would immediately be attacked by the whitefly looking for fresh meat, if you will, fresh vegetables, I should say, and immediately those new transplants will get virus. The only way to get rid of virus kitties out there is to be ruthless. Pull these plants up, destroy them. Do not compost them. Throw them in the garbage can. Burn them if you can. We also get silvering of, this is a squash of some sort, Cucurbitaceae, that could happen to melons and other things in that family. This is also a disease vectored by whiteflies. How can we manage them? Timely planting. If you plant your Brassicaceae in the winter months and you harvest them before about mid-March, you probably won't have any insect problems. Voila, problem solved. Works quite well in Florida. Resistant varieties. For as far as insects go, there aren't that many that are resistant, but potential. Scout and handpick. Look for them. You see one big old tomato hornworm, which is a big old caterpillar, on your tomato. What do? You pick them off and you drop them to the ground, and with your big foot you squish them. Problem solved. No need to spray. Beneficial insects. Allow the beneficial insects to do their job. I do not recommend that a homeowner go out and purchase beneficial insects. By and large, what they purchase are ladybugs that are adult, and the minute you release them, they fly to the neighbor's house. So don't waste your money. They're out there. Get to learn the good guys. There are plenty of them. You don't need to augment that. The only place where adding beneficial insects works really quite well is when we're reintroducing the enemies to invasive exotic plants like the air potato leaf beetle. That's working quite well. Or if you're in like a screened-in enclosure or greenhouse where you don't have beneficials generally. But if you have your typical good balance of bugs in your yard, you'll have them come in for free. Insect management should always start, doesn't matter whether you're organic gardener or conventional, it should always start with the least toxic product. That's just a given. Soaps work quite well. Oil sprays, neem oil was one. Some people will make spray oils or soap oils out of dishwashing liquid and um, cooking oil. Now, if you use dishwashing liquid, that is not at all considered an organic input by the organic board, for the record, because it's full of other chemicals. Chemical insecticides may need to be employed. Soap is a chemical, of course, but soap works by suffocation, as do oil sprays. Oh, I didn't mention BT. BT is short for Bacillus thuringiensis. Goes under a couple of trademark names. Dipel, Dipel, and Thuricide, Thuricide. It's a bacterium, a soil bacterium that we cook up, if you will, and we bottle it. It's a living organism, and when it's sprayed onto the foliage of plants eaten by caterpillars, it's a stomach poison to a caterpillar. It works only exclusively on caterpillar physiology, not yours or mine or your dog or your cat or your grandkids. So it's a really safe chemical, natural, organic pesticide. Now, I've had people that don't want to use any kind of sprays whatsoever. Well, you sometimes can exclude the pests from getting to the plant by putting a mesh over it before they get in there to eat on it. Now, something that big a mesh is probably going to only keep out some large insect like a butterfly, which lays her eggs on your cabbage or whatever and produces lots of little caterpillars. So it might work for something like that, but it won't keep out aphids or thrips or white flies or many of the other smaller insects. Good news is it probably would also allow beneficial insects to go in and out as well. Pesticide safety, it doesn't matter whether it's an organic pesticide or not. Always follow the directions. Guys, read the label. Use it on the listed crop. You may see it listed for only certain types of crops or only certain times of the cropping cycle. For example, a pesticide may say do not use within so many days of a harvest. So you may have to wait a month before you can harvest, but the insects are chewing today and you're going to pick tomorrow. Well, maybe you need to use some soapy water instead of that other insecticide. Measure correctly. This is very important. Some of these are used at fairly low dosages. Follow the application interval. For example, if it says spray every 2 weeks for best control of diseases, or after rainfall, you better spray every 2 weeks or after a rainfall. This is where controlling diseases can be very tricky for the homeowner is compliance. Wear your protective gear. You'll read the label and it'll have what we call a PPE section, personal protective equipment. Even organic pesticides will have this. Usually the typical PPE, personal protective equipment, is wearing shoes and socks, long pants and a long sleeve shirt, and some kind of a waterproof glove, rubber glove if you will. That's even common on the organic pesticides. Some pesticides may recommend some kind of eye protection or respirator in some cases. Usually these aren't in the homeowner realm. That doesn't mean they're necessarily dangerous or evil, but it's protecting the person who's closest to the spray wand from getting it onto his or her skin. Correctly use them, store them properly. Most people store these at too high a temperature. Dispose of the container correctly. You don't just chuck it into the garbage can half full. Wash and peel your produce before eating. I think that's kind of a duh, right? Know the signal words on pesticides. The least toxic will have the word caution. The more toxic substance will have the signal word called warning. The most toxic will have the word or words danger or danger poison. So here's a product. The generic is called Carbaryl. It's the active ingredient in a trademark product called 7. Now, you may have used 7. It's great for many insects and caterpillars on vegetables. It also has a short spray to harvest interval, usually only a few days is my recall. But I would read the directions first before giving out any kind of information. Notice it says caution. It also says keep out of the reach of children. All pesticide labels will have keep out of the reach of children and have a signal word. In this case, it's caution. That means it's one of the lower toxic insecticides. Here's insecticidal soap. You don't think of soap having a lot of worries, and it really doesn't, other than maybe some eye irritation and it tastes bad when you eat it or try to drink it. Not that I'm suggesting you do such, but it says caution. And there are several brands out there. I've just blanked them out because you don't need to know the name brand. Warning means it's more toxic. Notice to keep out of reach of children. So this may be a small amount of product right out of the bottle that could cause chronic or acute problems. Then we have the most toxic. You have sometimes a skull and crossbones as well. It says poison in this case. Nicotine sulfate. Nicotine sulfate was used quite a bit by homeowners and other people for insect control. And it was sold under the trademark name Blackleaf 40. And it has danger poison. Nicotine sulfate is also the active ingredient in cigarettes, boys and girls. Keep that in mind. You don't need cannonballs to kill small insects. I can't tell you how many times I'll recommend soapy water or neem oil to kill the insects, or maybe even in some cases with neem oil control diseases when applied early on. But people say, well, can't you recommend something stronger? Well, you don't need these cannonballs to kill these insects. Most of these least toxic products will kill insects dead very quickly, and dead is dead. I mentioned reading and following all the directions. Why am I reiterating this? A lot of people think this is how you mix or measure an ounce of the product into a gallon of water. They grab the bottle, take it over to the opening of the spray tank and go glug, 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 glug. Well, that's about an ounce. No, that's 4 glugs. Who knows what that is? Now, going back to some of my younger days, do not go into your mother or your spouse's kitchen and grab the measuring spoons or her measuring cups or his measuring cups and use them to mix up any kind of pesticide, even organic pesticides. Buy a separate set of measuring spoons and a separate measuring cup to measure properly and label it poison so you won't be tempted to take it back into the kitchen. I didn't make that mistake as a kid. I talked about beneficial, so let's talk a little bit more about it. Bees, obviously for pollination. Lacewing, don't have a I don't have a good picture of them there. Ladybugs or lady beetles, we know. Praying mantis actually are not a very good beneficial insect in controlling most of our insect problems in veggie gardens. They usually go after larger insects that move relatively quickly, whereas most of our insects that feed on veggies are relatively sedentary. Assassin bug is the upper right hand picture. You can see how he or she gets his name. Look at that big proboscis, his piercing sucking mouth part, poking into the exoskeleton of that poor hapless beetle of some sort. Spiders are good. Various wasps are good. The lower right hand picture is a trichogramma wasp, a species of some sort. When people hear wasps, they start panicking and think of those bad killer bee movies from the 70s and all that kind of stuff. These wasps are teeny. We're talking a speck of dust practically. And some of them, depending on the species, may lay an egg into the egg of her food source for her babies, or it may be an immature insect of a species that she has deemed to be good eating for her offspring. In general, most predators are what I like to dub bigger, badder, faster, and fewer. The lower left-hand picture you can't see in two dimension, but or in still, but he moves relatively quickly, and he has piercing, sucking mouth parts that kind of are curved like a U, and you can, if you look closely at the picture, you can almost see translucent white, what looks kind of like dead skin. Well, he or she has been sucking out the juices of whitefly immatures. Caterpillars get parasitized by many other wasps. These are actually the pupal cases of those wasps. The mother wasp laid her eggs in this poor hapless hornworm, it looks like, and the immatures hatch out of the eggs. They're grub-like creatures, and they eat the inside out of the caterpillar for food. Then they pupate, making a cocoon. In this case, it's externally to the insect that it fed upon. And those cocoons will sooner or later have a little hatch door open at the bottom, and which is really the top, but it looks like the bottom because the caterpillar is upside down. If you ever see this in the garden, leave it alone. You'll have about 20 or 30 more of these parasitic wasps in your garden. They're very good. Nematodes aren't insects, but we need to talk about it in veggie gardening. It'll probably be one of the few places we talk about nematodes in any of the modules in Master Gardener training. Nematodes are microscopic worm-like creatures that feed on plant roots. They pierce and suck juices out of the roots of the plant, damaging them. The damaged roots can't absorb water and nutrients nearly as effectively. In some cases, if nematodes are so high in number in the soil, the plants may just burn up or wither and die or fail to be very productive. In the lower picture here, that's a microscope photograph of these worm-like creatures. Sometimes they live inside the root, sometimes they live external on the root surface. It's very hard to diagnose some nematodes just by looking at the top of the plant. You can kind of see this one stunted if you look at that little lettuce, but until you pull up the roots that look kind of all knotty and clubby and kind of arthritic, if you will, can you really go, aha, that's the problem. And there are different species of these nematodes. We won't speciate them in class because, again, you can't see them. They really would have to go up to the university to be done. By and large, this is a waste of your time and money to have them speciated. I can guarantee that you have nematodes in sandy soil in Florida. Now, bacterial galling, we talked about nodules on the roots a couple of times, once already in the veggie module and also back in the botany section. The upper right hand or left hand photograph are those spherical nodules or bacterial galling of some leguminous Fabaceae, legume, bean, and pea family member. That is a symbiotic organ relationship between a bacterium and the legume or bean and pea. Look at the root knot nematode. You can see that those aren't spheres. They're lumpy, they're bumpy, they're irregular. You couldn't remove them like you could the galls of the bacterial symbiont. And here you can kind of see the guy with the pocket knife cutting, and you can't remove it. It's like a tumor, if you will. So how do you manage nematodes? Good crop rotation, as I mentioned in an earlier module of vegetable gardening. Don't put the same family of plants in the same spot time and time again. That helps. There are certain cultivars and varieties, some of the heirlooms, that are resistant. If you look at some seed packets, especially like tomato, you may say VFN after the cultivar name. The V is verticillium, F is fusarium. Both are fungal diseases. The N is nematodes. So you may have that. I've also seen it on some pepper cultivars. Organic matter. Organic matter, as it breaks down, releases those organic acids and those organic chemicals. Ah, chemicals. Yes, not all chemicals are bad, as we've learned already in these modules. So these chemicals that are coming out of the organic matter reduce or kill nematodes. Also, it's a little harder for nematodes to slither around when it's a tighter the sand particles. It's easier to slither in between sand particles than it is compost mixed with sand. Marigolds. Now, we talked about that a little bit earlier in the module. Marigolds, you heard me kind of downplay it. Now I'm kind of upplaying it. So am I playing both sides of the vegetable garden fence? No. There is some research, and you can Google this and find the EDIS fact sheet on it. But there are certain cultivars that have been tested and have shown, when done right, can work very well at reducing nematode populations. The marigolds are giving off chemicals that are killing the nematodes. Ha ha, chemicals again. Ha ha. Soil solarization. Here's the chemical free way of killing them. Yeah, what you do is you add your organic matter at the end of the cropping season, let's say mid-June. Rototill that in, make sure it's moist, and you cover it with a big, large, clear, the thicker the plastic the better, the longer it'll last in the sun, clear plastic, not black plastic. Now you're thinking, why would I want clear plastic over black? Well, clear plastic will allow more solar radiation in, and the cover traps that heat. And what is happening is it's getting so hot under that cover that the nematodes are literally cooking to death. The technique of soil solarization can also kill off some disease-causing organisms and sometimes some weed seeds. Don't expect miracles with this, but it can help. There are currently no chemical nematicides, meaning purchase in a bottle or in a bag, that you can put on for home gardening use. There are things that they use in agriculture for this purpose. Now, here is the story behind the marigolds. You need a big solid block of marigolds planted, kind of like this picture. And you let them grow, you let them pretty much die back at the end of the season, and then you mow them down. And then you leave this clippings and what I'll call marigold mulch in place, and you plant directly into the mulched up marigolds. Typically, the old-fashioned stinky varieties work best. If you remember marigolds back before probably the late 80s, a lot of times you would rub the leaves and they put off a very nasty smell. Most of the modern cultivars have been bred not to have that disgusting smell. But whatever that disgusting smell is, has something to do with getting rid of the nematodes. I think it's in the fact sheet as to what the exact chemical nature is of the nematicide or nematode reducing properties of marigolds. Here's soil solarization. The bigger the cover area, the hotter it'll be. So these smaller areas won't get as hot as if this whole area were covered. Just keep that in mind. And while this plastic looks white, remember the soil is moist underneath and moisture has condensed. And then the camera lens and eye is fooled to thinking it looks more white than it is. It's actually clear. Now, if you cover like this, you want to leave the cover in place for about a minimum of a month. 2 months would be far better. Now, don't make the mistake of removing the cover and start on the right-hand side of the photograph with your rototiller. Go all the way over to the left-hand side of the photograph and then come back in the uncovered area into the covered area, because you'll just reinfect what you just solarized. We'll talk more about diseases and plant pathology, and when it comes to disease control, most homeowners are usually trying to play catch up and fail miserably, or they fail beautifully, however you want to look at that. Best way to control diseases is to avoid them. Cultural methods: grow where it's full sun, where the plants dry off real quick in the morning. Water during sunrise, not sunset, for example. Disease-resistant cultivars in some cases can make a tremendous difference. Other practical techniques like airflow, not planting too close, plants too close to one another. I talked about resistant varieties with tomatoes earlier, just a moment ago, and here's a Roma, which is a style of tomato, not really a cultivar, but this Roma tomato has VFN. V, verticillium fusarium, is the F, that is for disease, and N is nematodes. Start with healthy plants. If they look kind of sickly at the nursery, don't buy them. We talked about keeping the foliage dry and watering in the morning. Mulch. Putting a layer of mulch over the soil surface keeps the soil from splashing up. The soil is loaded with all sorts of disease-causing fungal spores. Organic matter, it leaches those organic acids, those chemicals, again, that can inhibit certain fungal and bacterial diseases. We talked about crop rotation, but it's very important to keep that in mind. Rotate crops. Don't put the same family in the same place over and over. Learn which diseases affect which plants. People are stunned to realize that tomatoes in Florida are riddled with diseases, but we're a very moist, humid climate. A lot of people come from another part of the country, have never experienced a subtropical climate. Tomatoes are native to the Andes, I believe, where it's relatively arid. So tomato diseases go hand in hand, especially as we get humid in the spring months. Bring good samples in for identification. If you're having to advise a client, tell them don't bring in all dead plants. They yield no tails. I can tell you exactly what happened. It's dead. That's not very helpful. So seeing a progression from disease or dying to yellowing to turning brown to dead, or with some healthy and good. Cleaning and disinfecting tools and equipment. I talked about the rototiller. If you run that through where it was solarized and unsolarized without disinfecting, you're spreading around disease organisms and nematodes. Your pruning equipment, when you're cutting things off or down on your veggies, they can spread diseases to the next plant of that particular species. Animals like to get into veggie gardens. Birds are one of our bigger problems, especially when they peck at tomatoes and fruit crops, etc. Moles will dig and tunnel. Typically, they don't do a lot of damage, but occasionally they'll go after some of the rooted vegetables like potatoes and stuff. Mice, I haven't seen too many mouse problems, but occasionally. Bunny rabbits, of course. Squirrels, yes, they're a menace. They're a rat with a fuzzy tail. That's all they are. So get used to that, and maybe deter them more aggressively than you do. Armadillos typically don't eat the veggies, but they can dig and root around and dig up plants inadvertently. Raccoons will go after certain vegetable crops, especially if you grow sweet corn. They adore sweet corn. Trust me. Deer, if you're in a deer prone area, again, they will go after pretty much anything in a veggie garden. Now, when it comes to managing animals in the garden, there aren't many great options, to be honest. Your best long-term, chemical-free one is fencing or exclusion. If you're having problems with deer or you're having problems with rabbits, you want to put some kind of fence where they can't hop over or get underneath. Trapping. Well, trapping of animals is a problematic thing. You catch a bunny rabbit or an armadillo, what are you going to do with them? You cannot legally release them on state, federal, or county land. You can only release it on private property with the written permission of the private property owner. If it's a non-protected species of animal, they could be humanely killed. Think about that one, boys and girls. Is that what you want to do? Scare devices. Might work for a short amount of time in rare instances, but Most of them don't generally work. The noisemaker ones almost never do. One scare device that I have seen employed that has some um, value to it are those inflatable men that kind of go up and down and up and down at the car dealerships and things along the roads that we see. They're good at scaring away birds. They don't necessarily scare away anything else other than birds. If birds are a problem on a crop, it's probably best to net it where they can't get to it. Repellents. There are all sorts of things. There are homemade ones too, based on castor oil and other goodies. But by and large, they're temporary at best. Some of the repellents, like dried blood, will attract every dog in the neighborhood to pee on your yard. Oh, sorry, that wasn't very G. But do you want that on your produce? Think about it. Population reduction. Wow, isn't that a euphemism? That means you get rid of them somehow. That does not mean you put poisons in the yard. Poisons in the yard are not legal in the state of Florida. So, population reduction is generally not for the faint of heart. Other tactics? I'm ears. Scarecrows. All right. So you had another tactic. Well, they're kind of cute and they're old timey, and if it gets your grandkids or kids to kind of want to venture into the vegetable garden or do something with their old clothes, by all means do it. But by and large, are just really a novelty item or an objet d'art, if you will, and that's about all they are. Like I said, if birds are going after your crop, berries, or whatever, keeping them out of there is your best bet. Notice this netting is held above the canopy of foliage and the fruit. If you just lay it over top of it, they'll dive bomb down and they'll get your crop in spite of your weak effort of trying to keep them out. If you're having things digging like armadillos, this fence is pretty good. This fence goes into the ground and slightly below it, so nothing's going to try to dig underneath it. Enjoy the fruits of your labor. Again, we can grow vegetables in Florida if we do it at the right time of the year, know what insects can go after it, know what diseases can go after it, have a plan, have our plan of attack, whether it's an organic pesticide or not, we need to be ready. That ends part 4 of vegetable gardening.